Okay. Previously we talked about the transfer of electrons with an ionic compound, and that was because a metal wanted to lose the electrons, and a non-metal was generally there to accept the electrons, and that ended in a positive and negative ion that generally attracted each other, and that electrostatic force keeping them together was what actually made the ionic bond. Now, covalent compounds, you have to remember, they form between all nonmetals. Now, when the nonmetals are close to each other, if they all want to gain electrons, then they're going to start to overlap their orbitals in order to try to complete the octets, or duets in hydrogen's case, in order to make them stable. And they're all fighting for the electrons, so nobody wants to lose them. So they in turn will share the electrons in order to make each other happy. One thing to keep in mind before we start to draw these is just to give you a little tip on how to start. If you look at a chemical formula, generally, again there's always exceptions, usually the first element that's listed in these chemical formulas is the one that is going to be in the middle of the compound, and then the other elements will bond around it. So we usually call them the middleman. So the first element listed in a chemical formula is generally always the middleman. Now there are a few exceptions involved here because, for instance, you may have a chemical formula that just has 2 atoms. Well, there's really no middle person in this case because 2 atoms can only exist side by side, and there's no 1 atom in the middle and having others come off of that. The other exception would be with when hydrogen is the first one listed in a chemical formula. Hydrogen is never going to be our middleman because he can only bond with 1 other atom. So he can't be in the middle and have others bond to it, or he can only bond with 1 thing. So when we start to draw these, we're going to look at the chemical formula. We're going to look at the first one listed, and generally that is one that can bond to most things or form most bonds, and that's usually a middle person. So let's draw some.